welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Keating. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Heartful Parent Podcast. Today, we are talking about money, and how to talk to our kids about money. To do this, I'm really excited to introduce you to my good friend and colleague, Jon Alvarado. Jon implements his decade plus of years of teaching experience to provide a financial literacy course that helps both students and their families break barriers. He's a recipient of the University of Nebraska at Lincoln College Preparatory Academy Teacher of the Year Award. And Jon has worked with over thousands of diverse students and their families to provide connected instruction in both math and financial literacy. Jon uses his powerful combination of grace, empathy, psychology, and financial literacy skills to teach you and your kids to increase your self-worth and your net worth. A strong believer that we are all human beings, not spreadsheets, Jon is always poised and ready to show us how to tap into our earning potential. Jon is a certified minority enterprise business owner, and as that understands the challenges and barriers that poverty presents mentally, emotionally, and financially. His mission is to educate, empower, and elevate all of us and our financial literacy skills to increase our self-worth and net worth, as I said. In this conversation, to say we're going to talk about money doesn't really do it justice. Here's what I love about what Jon and I dig into and what you're about to hear. Is we're not just talking about hard money financial skills, but Jon brings such a human touch to his approach to financial literacy and teaching our children about finances and being financially aware and savvy and wise and literate and all of those things. Because what he says, and this is so in keeping with everything that I teach, is that connection and empathy, empowerment, and a positive mindset are really at the heart of all of it. Jon helped me, and I think will help you, reframe the way that we think about money and going from a deficit and negative mindset into a positive, empowered mindset based in abundance, and how we can really start to influence our kids from that place of abundance rather than a place of fear and deficit. So without further ado, I introduce Jon Alvarado. Jon, I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast.
Christy, it's always great to see you. Thank you so much for having me on, and I can't wait for this conversation, and a special hello to your listeners today.
Well, thank you for being here. As you and I have talked quite a bit offline or, off this podcast about the importance of financial literacy, but it's something that we don't talk a lot about in parenting circles. And I felt like this was a conversation that can be so valuable. So I want to start, obviously this is something that you are immersed in on a daily basis. You talk about this stuff all the time, but most of us don't, right? Most of us as parents are so busy dealing with all the other things, right? The tantrums, and whether that's a teenage tantrum or a toddler tantrum, managing screen time, managing behavior, dealing with school. I think a lot of us, and I put myself in this category, forget that there's this really big piece out there that our kids need guidance on, and that's financial health and financial literacy. Aside from being busy, I'd love to start with this question, which is, why don't parents, in your experience, why do you see that families aren't having these conversations, talking about money, talking about finances?
Yeah, it's such a great question and very validating to what you described earlier too. Of all those things matter, right? Part of the challenge too is just how finance has kind of evolved. And so, the number one thing I always hear is, I wasn't taught this growing up, or my parents didn't teach it to me, or it wasn't taught to me in school, which is still sometimes the case. But to think back to like one of the investment vehicles, the Roth IRA wasn't even a thing until 1998. And when you think about time, that's only, 20 to 25 years where people are still trying to wrap their head around the idea that, there's this investment thing here for me to invest in. Oh, now I can start to think about money differently. Oh, I can help my money grow, where that wasn't even a thing. And so those conversations weren't being had, right? To be able to look into the future and really think about how can we grow our money through investment. What else then comes with that? Are there other things that financial education is about? And then you realize everything matters, right? Everything can factor into financial education. So some of it's really how finances have just evolved over time.
I totally relate to that. What you said that you hear from a lot of parents, which is, I was never taught this stuff growing up, and that the financial landscape, if you will, has changed so rapidly. I had no idea that the Roth IRA had only been around since 1998. And I have one. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I really know what it is though. And I think there's a lot of parents that feel like they're kind of doing these things on autopilot. I'm wondering though, if this resonates with you at all, because finances were not something that we talked about growing up. And I sometimes think about it as like it falls in the same category as sex and, talking about, body safety and all of that, which is parents don't know how to do it because they don't feel like they've got the information, but also there's this discomfort with it. I feel like when I was growing up, finances were something for adults and it wasn't discussed with kids, and it wasn't discussed in polite circles, right? We weren't supposed to talk about money, kind of like sex and bodies and all of that. And I know those are two totally different subjects, but I feel like we have a lot of the same hangups about them. Do you see that as well?
Absolutely. There is such an impact there that, you're not talking about those things. Money's not talked about. It's a very emotional, polarizing topic, very sensitive. Oftentimes where we fall back to in our conversations is we talk about our limitations with money when really we should be talking about our leverage with money, right? How can we leverage this? How can we leverage and to accelerate our earning potential? And so a lot of it comes around just maybe the worst case scenario feeling there. And really financial education, it doesn't have to be like that. And once you get a little bit of education and that education starts to compound, and then you start to realize, you reframe a bunch of things and it's not as bad as what I thought. In fact, I can use this now to really help put value into people. And I think that's where financial education, where we want things going, like you mentioned, some of your other topics that you talked about, the education piece is so, so vitally important.
Something that you said in there just really resonated with me, because what I heard you say is we often approach financial education, financial literacy from really a place of fear, which is also what we tend to approach a lot of other pieces of parenting with, right? We live in a very fear-based culture. Yeah. And what I heard you say, which is the same thing I say with other topics, is that we have to kind of flip that script on its head and approach this from a place of empowerment, a place of abundance and education. So for those parents who are sitting there thinking, okay, I hear that. I hear that, this is probably something that our kids need guidance on, but I don't have the first clue where or when to start talking about finances. or I can't even really define what financial literacy means.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that just a little bit? What does it mean and how do we get started?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And financial literacy, first off, is dynamic, right? It's when you think about the word literacy, you're thinking about education, and it's just your education around finances. Having said that, everything matters with finances. Your physical health, your emotional health. Yes, the financial piece is there, but it's dynamic where everything matters. And so where your listeners are starting, it depends on what age, their kiddo's at too. It might mean when your kiddo's young, talking in the toddler or the infant stage, where that physical contact is really important to keep them safe and to show the love and support. All those things that you describe in your course and talk about, those are so important and they matter in financial literacy. And then as they get older, let it organically happen. They'll be curious, right? Can we start a bank account? Well, yeah, let's go out. Maybe that's the first thing you do is you just go get them a bank account, right? And then as your education grows, now you can start to maybe talk them through scenarios. And you'd be surprised, like it's maybe more along the lines too of you're showing them counterintuitive approach to financial literacy is maybe showing them empathy, showing them how to listen, talking them through, validating their responses to things. And so it's more opening up communication too. That's a huge part of financial literacy. So there's a lot of soft skills that you can incorporate that maybe don't have anything to appear to do with financial literacy, but have everything to do with financial literacy as your relationship with your kid grows.
That is such a lovely way of thinking about this, because I think people hear financial literacy and think money just has to do with money. But what you're saying, and there's so much synergy in what I talk about and teach and what you're saying, and that's that the connection and the empathy and the understanding and the validation, like those are the critical foundation for this broader understanding of the financial landscape out there.
Right. And, finances, like we talked about, can get, you can get pretty charged around them. It's a very easy topic with anyone. And you and your kid's relationship might not be any different. A simple thing that you can do right away is to simply mirror the next time your kid is talking about money and you feel like there may be a little disconnect, to just start mirroring your kid. And so you're just going to take the last 1 to 3 words of what they talk about, and then you're just going to reframe, or you're just going to put it back to them. So they might, for example, say, Mom, Dad, I'm really nervous about college. And you say, well, nervous about college. And all that's going to do is just open up lines of communication, and that's going to keep them safe in being able to explain, and you're just getting them to try to go on and go on and go on and go on and validate them along the way. It sounds like you might be a little confused about this decision. And so being able to put a label on how they're feeling, those are very powerful tools to be able to use with your kid. And what you're doing at a subconscious level is you're teaching them how to listen. And listeners get paid a lot of money. They just do. So that's a very simple thing that parents can start doing that has nothing to do with finances, but everything to do with finances.
I love thinking about that from that standpoint, and that those skills translate into higher earning potential for our kids when they can do those things.
For sure. Absolutely.
For those parents who have older children, say, tweens, teens, maybe even young adults. And, maybe they've really been working on these, as you said, soft skills, right? The connection, the empathy, the mirroring, the listening skills. For the parents listening that say, okay, I feel like my kid has that down pretty well. We do that pretty consistently in our home. How do we then move on to the more hard skills, like what's a Roth IRA, or how do we invest money, or how do I even manage that checking account that we've opened, which is, for full disclosure, my teen has a checking and savings account that she's had for a number of years now. And that's kind of where we're still at with her, is
Right. Mm-hmm.
figuring out how do I manage this if I spend this much on gifts for my family and during the holidays, how much money do I have left over? How do we do that and do it well? And then where do we need to go from there?
Yeah, so that's really along the education piece, because there's so many skills that you can pick up on pretty quick, right? So, like, for example, one of the things that if you have a teen who's getting ready to go and start their college or career path, whichever is the best fit for them, they're going to want to know about comparison shopping. They're going to want to know about unit price. They're going to want to know about bulk shopping. And there's still the mindset piece is so critical too, of how is obtaining wealth okay? Like, that conversation needs to be had too. And so those are all pieces that need to be talked about. In terms of going back to what you said about savings, there comes a point when, is savings really a goal anymore? Is it now, can we move to transition from saving, which is really just a hedge against the risk that life throws our way, to now investing? Okay, maybe we don't want your money sitting there anymore. We want to make sure that you start to invest, because the powerful thing with the kids is they have time on their side, and there are so many options, and it's easy to want, our brain navigates towards that negative bias. And it's also very empowering to know that they have time on their side, and there are things in place for them right now to grow their money. And so being able, that investment piece, bring that in, just show them a graph of how compound interest works, and have that be like, yeah, this is what it could look like for you, and talk around compound interest. So yeah, all of those educational pieces around financial literacy then become really magnified as they start to get older.
It's funny that you mentioned compound interest, because you're talking about it from a wealth building standpoint. And one of the things I've heard from parents is, the teens or I should say young adults really, who go off to college, who don't understand how compound interest with a credit card works, and that does not work to their advantage, right?
Yeah.
They're suddenly getting penalized bigger and bigger and bigger. And I remember when my daughter, as she actually learned about compound interest recently in her math class, and she came home with these big eyes and was like, wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is a big deal. For those, I love that you're talking about approaching this from that wealth building, abundance mindset. And I think there's a lot of families who struggle with that. And I will say, as a woman in the world, there's also gender differences, right? I see or feel that a lot of times boys and men are taught to wealth build, and girls and women are not. And I certainly saw that in my own upbringing. And there's like a discomfort with that, right? With girls and women asking for what they are worth.
Absolutely.
Right. So how do we have some of those conversations, especially, for those parents who are saying, well, I'd love to teach this, but I can't teach what I don't know?
Yeah. Well, and you brought up some fantastic points, and just say the women in the world right now are kicking some serious rear end, and giving, like, just keeping that momentum going of the education, right? The empowerment, and then that will lead to elevation. And so just continuing to give access, right? It's the access. Can we give access to this information to everybody? Because then everybody wins. So I'll go back to a point too that you had brought up about it, because it all kind of ties into what you said about compound interest and about debt. And so really approaching that from an educational standpoint, because debt's not good or bad. Compound interest is not good or bad. It's what you do with it, right? So debt is that is a really important topic to wrap your mind around. How are you using debt? If debt's being used to strictly consume, that's where the education of you talking about of the compound interest maybe working against you. And that's where you want education on, right? You don't want the 18 to 20% of your money. That's not a good deal for you. Having said that, when you're getting into college, if you're so debt adverse, there might not be an opportunity for you to grow. And so it goes back to, again, that standpoint of like, sometimes we really believe more in our limitations than we do in our leverage, right? And so being able to leverage maybe the debt to grow. And then, so in other words, you're using your problem to solve your problem. Okay. So we use debt. We use it to build our wealth. Then we use the wealth to pay off our debt. That's more the mindset that we're trying to get in. And so some of that just is around opportunity. You'll know in your gut has enough data, enough information to know, is there an opportunity? And more chances than not, yeah, you do have an opportunity. And don't be afraid to leverage that, because it's hard to grow at zero too. So those are just all the educational pieces, the nuances that come into financial literacy, and encourage you not to think just right or wrong or in absolutes of just how can you use the education to help benefit you and where you're at.
That is, I think, such a valid point, because we tend to think of things in absolutes and bad and good. And what you're kind of highlighting is that there are a lot of things that we might categorize as bad, and I'm putting that in air quotes, that we can actually use to further build with a little bit of education and information out there. And I know you do a phenomenal job of teaching young people how to do that. I want to shift gears just a little bit, because I mean, we could dig into the nitty-gritty of how do we talk about Roth IRAs and debt and compound interest and investment and stocks and all of those things. And I'm not sure that we need to do that today. So I love that you're putting this in this bigger mindset or framework, I guess, for thinking about this from a place of what we have rather than our deficits. Can you talk a little bit about how we as families, and as we're having these conversations with our children, should really be talking about and measuring wealth?
Yeah, that's a great question. And wealth, this was such a powerful reframe that it really, because I think wealth makes people feel very uneasy obtaining wealth. There's stereotypes, there's stereotypes attached to anything. There's stereotypes attached to building wealth too. That it could be stuck up. You just care about yourself, you're selfish, all those things. And that mindset really hinders people, I think, from advancing, from being able to take the next step, because we are meant to grow, right? As human beings, we're meant to grow and we're meant to elevate, and our society needs you to grow and to make more money. So wealth is measured more in time than anything else, right? If you said, if I asked you, is $1 million a lot of money? Is making $1 million a lot of money? You might say, well, that depends. Did you make that in a year, or did it take you 40 years to make $1 million at $25,000 a year? And so that little shift there, that's how wealth, is measured, is more so in time. And that happens then pretty quick. You think about if your kid goes off to college or they start their career, they may not have an income. Then all of a sudden, when they finish, they're making 5, 6, maybe even 7 figures. And that transition happens really fast. And so that is how wealth is measured. And really, to encourage you to think about wealth that way is just, it's more measured in time than anything else, and why time is so important in your journey of building wealth.
Such a key point that I think makes so much sense when you say it, but we don't often think about it like that. We think in dollar amounts, right? As you said, is $1 million a lot of money? Well, if I made $1 million tomorrow, yes, I'd say that feels like a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right. But if it takes me 40 years to earn it, as you said, that's a really different picture that you've painted. So let's talk a little bit about, because as you said back at the beginning of our conversation, there are a lot of emotions wrapped up when it comes to money and talking about money and wealth and, generating wealth. And as you also just said, there's a lot of stereotypes there too. So, when we're talking about wealth, some other words that come up a lot are value and then worth or even worthiness, right? Can you help us parse out those terms a little bit? What's the difference between them? How should we be talking to our kids about them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's all, again, this is all centered around mindset. It's amazing how much of a mindset shift that needs to happen. It's so critical, right, to your financial literacy component there, that first off, you don't have to do anything to explain your worthiness. I mean, you're worthy because you're here, right? Where financial literacy can come in talking to your kids is how can you create value for people, right? When you start creating value for people and that starts compounding, your finances will compound with it. There's just no way around it. And you want that to happen, right? You want to make an impact on the world and your skill set is valued. And so that's kind of the line that you're walking, right? It's not that you're a good or a bad person because you've made $10 million and someone else has made $1 million or $50,000 or $60,000. It's how can you create value for people? And you're going to see your finances then increase as you start to add value to people.
That is such a optimistic and kind of a hopeful place to think about or talk about money from, instead of and I fall into this too. I was joking with my daughter at dinner the other night because I can't even remember what she said, but something about how she was going to move out on her own. And we weren't even, it wasn't in a argument kind of way. She was just kind of joking about it. And I said, well, that's great. Do you have X, how are you going to make X number of dollars for rent and car pay? Not that she can drive yet, so you're going to have to pay somebody to drive you around. You're going to have to pay for your phone and your internet and I realize now as I'm listening to you talk that, I was trying to sort of give her a dose of reality, right?
Yeah.
Of what it costs to live. And we live in a particularly expensive part of the country to live in. But I also recognize after listening to you that I was really approaching that conversation about money from oh, this is really bad and you're not going to have enough. And right, this negative place, right?
Yeah.
And you've just elaborated or sort of illuminated for us how we can think about that from a more positive mindset, a more empowered mindset than I was perhaps offering to my child at the dinner table.
Well, Christy, I think it's a challenge. It's a challenge I have. It's a challenge that every single parent has. You would probably be able to go back to family systems too, where again, I wouldn't say every conversation, but most of the conversations are around scarcity, around lack, around worst case scenario. And so sometimes it's just having the self-awareness to recognize that that's being portrayed. And it may mean then out of 10 conversations, you're just trying to reduce the way you talk about it by 2 or 3 conversations where the worst case scenario doesn't come in. You're just trying to reframe, right? And maybe just start there because it's easy to go down. Our brain's wired to go to the negative bias. Again, it is though, just if you can reframe things, if you can look at things a little bit different, you can see things a little bit different, then your mind is open up to possibilities. What you do in a positive mind frame is you're able to solve problems better. When you're in that negative bias, when you're in that negative mindset, brain wants to shut down, you don't become as innovative, right? You're not as innovative to want to solve problems. And you're definitely empowered. You definitely have the space and the capability to do it, just to think through different options.
Jon, there are so many other things we could talk about with this, but I feel like what you just said is such a lovely place to end this conversation because it ends on such a hopeful note, and that empowerment, abundance, optimism is not where we often land when it comes to money. And I just I think that's the perfect place to wrap us up today. I want to thank you so much for, really opening my eyes. And I have to imagine many of our listeners as well around how we talk about this. But for those people who want more or who are saying, okay, I'm ready to dive into this, where can they find you? And what is the best place for them to learn more from all you have to offer?
Absolutely. Well, first off, thank you again for having me on. And it was a pleasure to speak to you and your listeners. Just want to let your listeners know that there's excitement for you and your child moving forward. There really is. And that you'll be able to get through tough times, right? There tough times will come and go, right? You will have them, but to know that you'll be able to power through and fight through those. So thank you for asking. My website is www.teachfinanciallit.com. I'm on Facebook, Twitter. Those are the two main social media links that you can find me. My email is john@teachfinanciallit.com. I'd love to hear from you. And then we've also included for your listeners today a free lesson all around mindsets of millionaires that students absolutely love and your child will absolutely love as well. So that's free for you today, just for listening. And you'll have a link for that for your listeners.
Absolutely. We will put that link in the show notes, and I will, let people know that you've got a longer course about this as well that they can grab on my website. I've got it linked to on my website as well as yours. I have gone through part of the course and it really, really is valuable. Jon, thank you so much for being here. And for the reframe, I think it's a really beautiful reframe around a topic that people don't always love talking about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And, with your listeners, parent-child relationship, just continue to work through any uncomfortable feelings. They will come up, but know that you're going to put your child in a position to really have some financial success down the road. And I wish you all the best.
Thanks, Jon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you out there in Heartful Parent Podcast land for being with me today, for listening to the podcast. I'm really grateful to each and every one of you. I really hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Jon Alvarado. Jon might be one of the nicest guys I've ever met. I've met a lot of different people, both in my practice as a lawyer and now in my work as a business owner. And I'm just so impressed with the integrity and gentleness that Jon brings to the work that he does. And I love his perspective on, sort of shifting this and bringing it around connection and abundance and all of those things. I hope you got a lot out of it. As promised, Jon is offering everyone who listened today a free lesson on the mindset of millionaires. The link for that is in the show notes. And you can also use that to purchase the longer course that Jon runs. As I mentioned right at the end of our interview, I have taken a portion of it, pretty good portion of it, and it's really excellent information for adults, but also for your teens and young adults in your life who might maybe need a little bit of financial savvy in their world. So check that out. And just want to thank everyone. I will be back next week with more great content for you. Thanks so much.